my Hall of Fame fitness metric, JAWS, which many of you may be familiar with, but if you're not, I will catch you up. This is about kind of modernizing JAWS, which has been around for over 20 years now. And the field of analytics has advanced and has given us more tools, and the Hall of Fame selection process has evolved somewhat, perhaps no small part due to my input here. So yeah, this is a very hastily together cobbled together presentation here in terms of the deck, but it's part of a talk more or less that I've been giving for a while now. So bear with me here if the technical aspects get a little wonky, and I know you all have questions about the Hall of Fame, so we'll get this stuff discussed, and then I'll field some questions about whatever you guys want to talk about Hall of Fame wise. But it's great to be here. It's great to be doing something for a good cause, and yeah, just excited. So anyway, JAWS. JAWS is a Hall of Fame metric that I created in late 2003. It did not have the name, I think, for another year after that. Jaffee wins above replacement score. It's a means of comparing Hall of Fame candidates to the players who are already in the Hall at their position using wins above replacement. Originally, when I did this, I was at Baseball Prospectus. I was using their wins above replacement player metric, which preceded WAR, both the Fangraphs and Baseball Reference version, in the public eye by several years. It did have some drawbacks, namely mainly a too low replacement level, but it really, I think, was a vast improvement over Bill James's win shares, which was what I had in mind when I was thinking about um, using this for Hall of Fame evaluation tool, and found it to be a rather useful tool. Basically, what I started with was I was using uh, each player's career wins above replacement. And what I defined as their peak, which at that point I was using a best 5 consecutive years definition, with allowances for military service and major injuries and things like that. I had to hand compile it, making some judgment calls doing that. And it was a couple years later that I moved to a best 7 years at large definition of peak, which I found A, it was a little bit easier to automate, and B, it did, I think, a little bit better job of explaining some of the guys who are in the Hall of Fame who did not have longevity. Um, this was not so much a scientific study as it was one of feel, trying to account for the fact that not every Hall of Famer is there because they stuck around 20 years and hit the major milestones. Um, so JAWS used Baseball Prospectus's wins above replacement player metric until the 2013 cycle. Sometime in 2012, I crossed paths with Sean Foreman at Baseball Reference, who I was already friends with and on good terms with, and asked if he'd be interested in hosting a version of JAWS on BREF using WAR. And Sean and his team leapt into action and created something that uh, went well beyond what I anticipated, because it has these great player pages, which have a few hundred of the top players at each position ranked by JAWS, but with all of their traditional and advanced statistics side by side and sortable and everything like that. Um, and they're on every player page of note, every major league player page of note. I think you have to hit a certain threshold, but I'm not sure what it is. But it's there, and you can see players' jaws as they go through their careers. Um, the 2013 election was only a couple years after I joined the BBWAA and started accumulating my own time towards being able to vote for the Hall of Fame. Uh, I had up to that point, and still up until the 2021 ballot, had been doing virtual ballots. I'd been discussing each BBWAA and ERA committee candidates' JAWS case, and also whatever else we might bring into context. Wins above replacement player, obviously, or wins above replacement, obviously doesn't capture everything about what a player might do to make himself worthy of the Hall of Fame. It doesn't account for awards. It doesn't account for postseason. It doesn't account for a lot of historical context. I mean, WAR at its base is a context neutral stat, and so it's up to us to apply that context and to help frame what it is we're looking at. But I found that this was a useful tool for identifying the players who are as good or better as those in already in the Hall of Fame. And we've seen actual voters take it up even before I joined the electorate itself. We've seen actual voters cite Jaws in filling out their ballots. They don't necessarily adhere to it straight on down the line, but they do find it useful, especially when it comes down to comparing candidates when they still have a couple slots and a handful of guys they want to think about. So it's a useful tool, but like all tools, it could stand some revisions now and then. With over a decade worth of Jaws in its baseball reference form under its belt, and with starting pitchers standards starting to look like they may be inattainable for the current and recent crops of pitchers. I thought about what we might do to Jaws in order to get a better grasp on who's worthy of the Hall of Fame among more recent candidates. Um, I came up with something called S-JAWS, just starter JAWS. It's just a little initial in front of it. Didn't want to do the lowercase like F war or B war. I went for the old hyphen there. Um, but anyway, what I wanted to do, and this was something that I'd always been at least somewhat concerned about, is that Jaws takes an average at the position of everybody who's in the Hall of Fame, and at that given position. And for pitchers, you've got a lot of pitchers who were throwing 300, 400, 500, even 600 innings, like Old Hoss Radbourn back in the 1900, I mean the 19th century. So what I wanted to do, rather than completely excluding them from the data set, which I found didn't really do much to move the needle, it lowered the JAWS standard by about 1 or 2 points. I thought it would be more effective if we could find a way to limit their impact within that set. And so what I did was I scaled back the peak component. It still uses a player's best 7 seasons, but I scale each of those seasons to a 250 inning basis, or rather, now Baseball Reference does that for me. I don't have to do the math. Um, what this does here, you can see from that slide, is where the average Hall of Fame starter has averages almost 50 WAR over his best 7 seasons. Once we adjust those seasons, uh, scale them down to a 250 inning basis, that lowers the peak component by about 9 points, and lowers the JAWS component from by about 4.5 points. So you can see it just becomes a little bit more, I think, reasonable for more recent starters to attain a level like that and be identified as a strong candidate for the Hall of Fame. Um, we could, what this system has going for it is that I can at some point decide, hey, 250 innings is still too steep a basis to be applying uh, for prorating. We can dial this down to 225 or 200 or something like that. As it is, there's only one active pitcher who's even thrown a 250 inning season, and that's 42-year-old Justin Verlander. And that's like, I think he exceeded it by 1 inning. You can see even with this cross section of players that are right below the JAWS standard, which is to say the average for the Hall of Famers at the position. You've got guys like 70s and 80s pitcher Rick Russell and 90s pitcher Kevin Brown. Their adjustments don't change, or their peak scores don't change by much. And neither does Roy Halladay. But you go down a little further there, and you can see, Jim McCormick and Old Hoss Radbourn. Their peaks get cut in half drastically, or cut almost in half, and the impact is rather drastic. Sorry, I have a little slide graphic over this that I can't actually see what Old Hoss and Old Jim have there, so it's a little bit harder for me to deal with this for the first time here. But so anyway, what we can see here is when we look at the players who are most the pitchers who are most impacted by this are, sorry here, how do I magnify this? I'm trying to. I'm sorry, I can't do this very efficiently. But if you look at this table here, which is from a Fangraphs article, I don't have the link handy here, but just about all those pitchers are guys from the 19th century or the early 20th century, the dead ball era. Some of them lose as many as 14 points worth of jaws. And like I said, it lowers the average by about 4.5 points. Now, where this is interesting, and again, I can't unfortunately blow this up to the degree that I want here, but the pictures I've highlighted are the more recent ones that may be of interest for voters, including current recent candidate CC Sabathia, current candidates Mark Burley and Andy Pettit, upcoming candidates like Cole Hamels, uh, fondly remembered pitchers from the 80s and 90s like Dave Stieb and David Cohn, uh, potential Veterans Committee or Era Committee selection like Louis Tiant. The pitchers of interest there in those orange bars there. And you can see uh, they generally move up the rankings while the guys that are not in the highlights there are moving down because they're pitchers from earlier eras and have 300, 400, 500 inning seasons that are being scaled back. We saw with the election of CC Sabathia this year a real workhorse of a type that we're not going to see again, with the possible exception of Verlander. CC totaled almost 3,600 innings. He was born in 1980. Nobody else born after 1966 has topped his total. Tom Glavine, who I believe is 1966, is the last guy to throw that many innings. If Justin Verlander throws 162 innings, he will pass CC, but that's a tall order for a guy of his age and mileage. So it may be already time that we start thinking about dialing this down. But I think this is one way that we can look at, or we can use Jaws to help us sort through the pitchers of the recent past that we want to promote for the Hall of Fame. Now, not shown here in this particular cross section of the rankings for Baseball Reference is Felix Hernandez, who would be a few rungs below. Felix has an S Jaws that's about 44 or 45. I think this cuts off at about 47. The numbers are very compressed within this range. You've got a lot of guys who are separated by only a couple points. Johan Santana at 48.2 is one of them there, and he's right there with Andy Pettit and Mark Burley. He's about where I think we should be when it comes to recognizing Hall of Fame starters. But the difference between a high peak, short career guy and a long career, low peak guy like Pettit, who has a huge postseason volume, that's something we're all going to have to sort out as voters. And I don't know exactly where this is going to go. Now, when you've got Felix at 44 with a short career and no postseason to speak of, because the Mariners just did not get their shit together well enough to build a great team behind him.
Jay,
I
I
don't
just want to
know.
mention, Jay, no cursing. No cursing, Jay.
Got it. Sorry about that, folks. Where was I? Oh, so Felix Hernandez, I voted for him on my ballot this year. I'm not entirely convinced he's a Hall of Famer because even the distance between 48 points for Johan Santana, a pitcher who went one and done on the 2018 ballot because it was so crowded, and Hernandez, who had a shorter career, only won one Cy Young, did not have the playoffs. That 4 point difference is pretty substantial. There are a lot of pitchers in that gap. But I do think because we need to talk about these guys, and because I did not want King Felix to slip into the oblivion of one and done candidates, which for Santana, he can't even be considered for an Era Committee spot until I think it's 2032. You can't be considered during your time on the ballot, and then there's a 1 year grace period after that. That I think is designed to prevent the Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Kurt Schilling occurrence of transferring from one ballot to the next over into from happening again. Just get these guys out of the spotlight for a while. So anyway, we've only seen a few guys even get out of that one and done category onto the ballot. It's like putting somebody in 20 or 30 years of ballot oblivion. So I did not want that to happen to Felix, so I voted for him, hoping to make sure that he got at least 5%. He did. He got just about 20%. So we're going to be talking about these starters, and we're going to see where this goes. I'm somewhat excited to see Cole Hamels, who I think is somewhere around 71st in Jaws, with a score that's I think just a decimal point below Johan Santana, hit the ballot next year, because I think when while he did not have a Cy Young award, he did have some postseason greatness with the Phillies, World Series and NLCS MVP in the same year. And I think he's somebody we can talk about as we sort of look for the different shapes and sizes of pitchers that we think might be worthy of the Hall of Fame if we're not given a parade of 250 to 300 game winners. So that's where we're going with the starting pitching. Moving on, I've done something similar in concept but different in execution for the relievers. Um, the relievers are all bunched up, and wins above replacement, it does not do a great job of distinguishing between the WAR that a pitcher accumulates as a starter versus the WAR that the pitcher accumulates as a reliever. Dennis Eckersley tops the old school Jaws rankings, the slide on the left there, or the chart on the left there, because he has 1,000 or 2,000 innings as a starter before he even became the uh, shutdown reliever that we know and love. Once you throw, what I did was I added win probability added, and situational wins, WPA leverage index, into the mix. And what that did was that moved the guys in the orange, Trevor Hoffman, Billy Wagner, and Joe Nathan, there being the three next big name candidates in the that were coming up on the ballot. That vaulted Mariano Rivera into the top spot, and it moved those guys into the sixth, seventh, and eighth slots, making them the best relievers outside the Hall. I started doing this when Wagner and Hoffman were on the ballot. I was still at Sports Illustrated. This was something I was just kind of doing as an experiment. It took a few years before I formalized it into asking Baseball Reference to implement it. Um, I think, WPA and WAR are on different scales. They're kind of from different universes. WPA is measuring against average, WAR is measuring against replacement. I don't love that aspect of it, but I was struck by how well it rewarded the high leverage impact of these relievers. And I think that's what we're going for more than anything else, is that we want these guys not just to have racked up saves, but to have a high degree of difficulty. And that's, I think, part of what this is telling us, was that these guys did have a high degree of difficulty. Now, it worked for Wagner eventually in that he got in this year on his 10th ballot. Joe Nathan, who hit the ballot 2 years ago, went one and done. I was one of, I think, 19 voters. I think he needed 23 to survive. I was one of 19 to vote for him. He is in that one and done oblivion. So we couldn't help him. But I think when you look at this, you start to see even how hard it was for Wagner to get where he was, and how much work the likes of Kenley Jansen, who's now 10th, I believe, and Craig Kimbrell, who's somewhere in the mid-teens there, uh, what they still have to do and how far they have to go if they are going to be candidates that we talk about as hall worthy. The other area that I think is ripe for reevaluation, and really where I see the version of WAR that we've been using lacking, is when it comes to catchers. Baseball Reference uses defensive runs saved uh, as its defensive component. It has a lot of different categories for which it values. There's even a version called strike zone runs that it's published on Baseball Reference, but it's not actually integrated into the calculation of WAR. It does not. I have not done a full on study, but my impression is it does not correlate tremendously well with the pitch framing metrics of Baseball Prospectus, Fangraphs, and now Statcast. For now, I am using the Fangraphs version of WAR that does have pitch framing built in. I believe we incorporate Statcast's blocking values into our metric. for that aspect of it. Um, I've also used baseball prospectuses, so-called retroframing methodology, which goes back to cover the pre-pitch effects pitch count era, starting all the way back in 1988. So, which uses kind of a with you, without you, called strikes above average uh, calculation in order to give us at least rough estimates of how well, say Mike Piazza did. And turns out Mike Piazza, as you may remember, was actually, while he was denigrated for his low caught stealing rate, he was actually very good at pitch blocking, and he was great at framing. Um, Interesting result, because he was a converted catcher, somebody who agreed to don the tools of ignorance only after the Dodgers drafted him in the 62nd round or whatever it was. Um, so we only have a handful of catchers that we can use as yardsticks with full pitch framing data, even using this kind of baseball prospectus bridge. But what I started doing this a few years ago. I think when writing up a Yadi and Molina contract. Um, Another contract renewal, but started calculating this framing inclusive jaws using baseball prospectus to cover the pre 2008 years, and then Fangraph's war version to cover the post 2008 years. And what I found is that uh, this framing inclusive jaws, Mike Piazza is the runaway leader in this. Ivan Rodriguez doesn't change very much because he was not especially good at pitch framing. He wasn't especially bad. He was basically an average pitch framer. This is a guy who wanted to show off his arm because he loved to he loved that demonstration of strength and skill. Um, didn't really move the needle much as far as these rankings are concerned. But then Buster Posey and Russell Martin and Brian McCann all show up as among some of the best pitch framers of the era. We have Martin and McCann, I think, 1/10 of a run apart, just using the uh, Fangraphs WAR 2008 to 2020 or 2019 period, where both of those guys were active. The difference between them is that Martin was an excellent framer even before using the baseball prospectus element of this, whereas McCann was rough around the edges when he first got to the major leagues. Um, what I found was that Posey and McCann and Martin are very close to Pudge and to Joe Mauer in their values. When I use a WAR calculation based on the framing stuff with the best 7 seasons and the career rate, not using any B WAR in this. I thought that was a reasonable justification for voting for both Martin and McCann. Not because I'm 100% convinced they're Hall of Famers, but because I think this is a discussion we need to be having. I do think that the electorate considers Buster Posey to be a likely Hall of Famer, and Molina probably is going to get there as well. Now, knowing that, if I show you that Martin and McCann are pretty much on par with these guys, my hope was that it would stimulate some thinking, and that it would at least keep these guys around for direct comparisons on these upcoming ballots. It did not. I think Martin got 9 votes, McCann got 7 votes. They're in ballot hell, just like Joe Nathan there, like Bill Freehan, a 10-time All-Star catcher for the Tigers, who went one and done on the 1982 ballot and has yet to get an era committee placement. I did not want that to happen to these guys. I'm annoyed that it did. Um, Russell Martin's framing, for example, was so good that both the Pirates and Blue Jays made him their top offseason acquisition priority um, when he was a free agent, and those teams were instantly rewarded by breaking their playoff droughts of over 20 years, and they got back the next year. He was a transformational player in that regard because he could wrangle these pitchers and get them more strikes than they would otherwise have gotten. McCann was very good at that as well. McCann was the better hitter of the two, had more power. He's the only one of the two to win a World Series, and while that World Series was with the Astros in 2017, we've also learned that McCann was one of the few players who actually confronted Carlos Beltran about the use of the trash can banging system. So I think that's a small point in his favor. Anyway, it didn't take. So we're going to be talking about this stuff again when Buster Posey gets on the ballot because he had a shortish career, 1,500 career hits, but checked just about every box as far as accomplishments with the Rookie of the Year, MVP, 3 World Series, batting title, all that stuff, even a Gold Glove in there. So I'm hopeful that the voters and the readers who are interested in Jaws get in the habit of looking at these versions of things, especially when we talk about catchers and we talk about relievers. Um, that's where I want this to go. Um, I'm considering some other ideas that are not necessarily directly related to Jaws, more as a supplement to Jaws. One is building on Sam Miller's observation of the way that Championship WPA volume has switched from being largely a creation late in the regular season plus the limited postseason to now being much higher volume created in the postseason. Seeing if we can come up with some um, metrics or measures that give us an idea of, say, what a player like Andy Pettit has, what his contributions were in that area beyond what we have for him that's defined by traditional WAR. I'm still working with that. I just got a hold of that data this week. I don't even have a slide for you on that, but that's another thing I'm thinking about here. And I'm always looking at ideas and ways that we can keep Jaws at least somewhat fresh here. We've adjusted defensive systems. We've adjusted, within Fangraphs. I have played around with the possibility of a Fangraphs version of WAR, for example. I do reject the idea that it is appropriate for pitchers because over the course of a career, the difference in suppressing batting average on balls in play and in sequencing is very meaningful. And so you end up knocking down some guys like Tom Glavine and promoting some guys who probably shouldn't be there, probably shouldn't be promoted as much. But this is something I'm playing with. We'd hope to get it in place this year, especially given the stuff about the framing inclusive catchings, but we didn't get it together. Blame the 2 New York teams being in the postseason for extended runs and me being out of the office at the ballpark instead of puttering around with my spreadsheets. So that's basically what I have to say on the subject of unhinging Jaws. I know you guys all have questions here about the hall, and I'm happy to spend some time answering them if Nick can serve as a moderator.
Hi, Jay. Awesome stuff here. Yes, everybody, please leave your questions for Jay inside the Playback.tv chat. If you're watching this on Twitter or on the Pitcher List website, make sure you go to playback.tv/pitcherlist, and that is where the chat lives. It's the place to go. Jay, I really just got to hear this. All right. Who is the player that you're like, this guy has to get into the Hall of Fame next year that was not in the Hall of Fame this year?
Carlos Beltran's the leading candidate. I mean, next year's ballot is looking pretty thin. Cole Hamels is the top newcomer. Like I said, he is not somebody who looks like an obvious Hall of Famer, but I think as we evaluate starting pitchers, I think he kind of fits into this model of what we're looking for. But Carlos Beltran, in his third year, got to just over 70%. I have him as the 9th best center fielder by Jaws. I know that some people have their reservations about Beltran because of his participation in the Astro sign stealing scandal. I think rightly, I think some voters have viewed that as kind of we're going to prevent you from getting first year election, not unlike the way that they penalized Roberto Alomar for the spitting incident on the umpire back in 2010.
Yep.
There are people, though, who view it as a more serious transgression. I get that. My position on Beltran is similar to my position when it comes to drawing a line for PEDs between the pre-testing and post-testing era. If Major League Baseball could not penalize this guy for what he did, I'm not going to do their dirty work for them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So that's where I am on that. But I do think that it seems likely that Beltran is going to get in on this next ballot, with Andrew Jones probably a year behind him.
Gotcha. And I'm seeing a question here from Scott G. They ask, where does Yachty rank in catchers all time?
Well, if we're going simply by Jaws, it's not very high because
Hmm.
Molina was a below average hitter, a average, more or less average for the position. Excuse me here. I am actually pulling up my baseball reference page here so that I can look at it and give you an accurate measure here. So if I'm looking at the standard Jaws ranking, Yadier Molina is 22nd with a 35.5 Jaws. The catchers immediately around him are Jason Kendall and Daryl Porter. Nobody you're going to rush out to Cooperstown to see anytime soon. And below all of the BBWAA elected catchers, there are only 17 catchers in the hall, so we've got some. We should have some latitude here. But even going by this standard ranking without pitch framing, Buster Posey is 14th at 40.7 Jaws, five points ahead of him, 5 points ahead of Molina, with Thurman Munson and Ted Simmons above them. So Molina, just if I looked at this and I was saying like, okay, I'm not taking pitch framing into account, I would not vote for Molina. He's just not that close. But when I look at the pitch framing inclusive version, even though we have a much smaller group, the fact that they're so closely clustered together tells me I can't really separate them if I'm using those values. Now there are obviously the intangibles that one might consider there. I think what pitch framing does is it makes some of those intangibles very tangible, and I think gives you a defensible, objective rationale for voting for these catchers.
Sure. And really on that topic, in the MLB rule changes panel, there's a lot of discussion about the ABS system and how it might keep framing as an important skill or not.
Yes, that's actually good point.
That would change a little bit of this this context that you're adding.
Yeah, now there was, for a couple years there was a lot of talk that the ABS was going to completely do away with the need for pitch framing because it would be so good. Even as somebody who led the Robot Umps Now brigade over a decade ago, I have to admit that I've never been convinced by what we've seen from the ABS system and its promise. So I took great note when last year when it was reported that the challenge system had emerged as by far the most likely,
I love it
implementation of this.
personally.
Yeah, I think it's a much better idea. We don't need every pitch litigated. We want there to be, I think we want the game to be unencumbered by this. Called upon, these replays to be called upon rarely and in high leverage situations. Now, if we do come to this system with its challenges, we probably do need to have a leverage component in there because these are going to, this it's already very valuable to turn a strike into, or to turn a ball into a strike, and to do it at the volume that catchers do every year. That's why these values. I mean, like if Russell Martin has created an extra 167 runs with his pitch framing, that's like 10 runs a year over
Yeah.
a 16-year career or something like that. That's a lot of runs. But what we're going to need to do is probably come up with a leverage calculator to identify when these frame jobs are do turn balls into strikes in these challenge situations or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been calling for this for ages though. I love the idea of the tension added when a pitcher or a hitter, calls for it. It says, I want to challenge this. I think that's a lot of
Right.
fun. I also, I know this is a complete tangent, but I really do want to get rid of the whole like, hey, hold on a second. Is it okay, no, we're gonna keep playing. Like I hate this. It should be,
Right.
do we want to challenge it right now or not? Okay, we move on. You
Yeah,
know,
it'll be a much more instantaneous reaction instead of the. I mean, we'll all miss the Clayton Kershaw on the phone gif,
yeah,
but yeah,
exactly. It's
I
just
love that. I love that
uh,
one.
it's so
But yeah, I think having it be something that has to be instantaneous, I think is probably a necessity in this because we
absolutely.
don't want it to interfere with the game.
Mhm. So guys, remember, just go into the chat. This is the guy. If you want to know anything about the Hall of Fame, he's
Oh,
the one to talk to. And we actually have a panel later on, Jay. That is greatest Hall of Fame subs of all time. There's the Cooperstown Casebook, which Jay, you've been so generous to offer as a prize here for PitchCon and donating a copy of it. So thank you very much for that.
yeah,
Um,
it's harder to find now. It's actually officially physically out of print, but we still do score some copies now and then. Sometimes I swoop in and purchase a small chunk of them, and but I am happy to donate this and to sign it, and I'll inscribe it however the winner desires within
you know,
certain limitations.
it's no wonder I can't find it. You just have bought all of them. This is
I didn't. I wish I'd bought all. No, they're still out there. They're just not showing up in bookstores anymore. So you gotta be cagey about where you look.
sure. But anyway, so there is going to be this panel later tonight. The greatest Hall of Fame snubs of all time. And outside of the popular ones, of course, there's the steroid era guys where we're talking about, okay, what is they should be in, but maybe they shouldn't because of that. Fine. But who are the names that you don't really hear very often and that you have in your head just goes, man, people forgot about this guy and he really should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's funny. We've checked off a lot of the guys that I had profiled at length in the Cooperstown Casebook. I think it's 10 out of the 14 that I did essays on uh, for a book that came out in 2017 are now in. Um, so I think Bobby Grich is one of the ones that is not in. Lou Whitaker, another second baseman. Those are two big snubs. We took care of one of them this year, Dick Allen. Unfortunately, it was past the point when he could himself enjoy it because he passed away in late 21. Um, but those two stand out. Bill Dolan, 19th century, early 20th century shortstop, does very well in Jaws and was a bit of
Hmm.
a character. At one point, held the record or a share of the record for the longest hitting streak, and then I think Willie Keeler broke it. Um, it was a bit of a maybe a bit of a character clause guy too, unfortunately. Liked would sometimes get himself ejected from games so he could get to the track to place his bets on the horses.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah, there may have. Yeah, it's not the most savory character, but he had an impact back in the day on some winning teams. Let's see. There are Negro Leagues players that I am not the most. I am not deep in expertise in the Negro Leagues, but I do know that Rap Dixon and Chino Smith are ones that people talk about. People who know a lot more about that stuff than I do, and there are certainly others in there. Vic Harris, who was just bypassed by the ERA committee, top Negro Leagues manager, won 7 or 8 championships,
Hmm.
is somebody who I believe should really be in. Um, I'd love to see Louis Tiant in there. I thought long and hard about whether I would include him on my virtual ballot when I was writing about the ERA committees. Um,
I
I
see
think
Uncle Ted here, by the way. Good to see Uncle Ted. If you guys don't know, Uncle Ted, every single time we do a live YouTube podcast, Ted just spews everything on his mind inside the comments. It's great. He mentions Pete Rose. And I'm going to comment on this one. No, he should not, because Pete Rose, from many things, a couple things really quickly. One, Ellen Adair had a phenomenal quote about Pete Rose saying that cheating on baseball is not even in the top 10 of terrible things that Pete Rose has done. And I also, Pete Rose, I knew the rules, and we had a very obvious rule: do not bet on baseball or you will be banned and not in the Hall of Fame. And the man broke it. And
yep,
I do not have tolerance for this. And I think that
yeah, I
everyone should not have tolerance for this, because if you know exactly, if you're going to respect the game, it is an honor to be in the Hall of Fame. It is a sign of respect both ways. And if you are not going to adhere to a very clear-cut rule in this way, then I'm sorry, you don't. It's that
Yeah,
simple.
I agree completely. I mean, he had one job. He had one job, and that was to respect the competitive integrity of baseball. That rule is posted in every clubhouse in multiple languages. I'm told it's now in Japanese as well as being in Spanish. Um, every player essentially has to sign a waiver acknowledging that they know this rule. Uh, he couldn't do it. Now, he could still have probably come back to baseball if he had uh, apologized promptly and with at least the perception of sincerity, and maybe and I think probably if he had couched what he had gone through in the language of addiction and recovery. I think we as a society have become reasonably forgiving of these transgressions. I mean, you look, we've got former cocaine users in the Hall of Fame now. I think if Pete Rose had said, "Hey, look, uh, I have a gambling problem. Uh, I acknowledge that this clouded my judgment when I was playing baseball or when I was managing. I'm deeply sorry. I know that I broke the rule. Um, I would like to get reinstated to baseball, and I would like to work to use my uh, experience in this area to warn others of the dangers of this, both inside and outside of baseball." I think baseball would have taken him back in pretty quickly. He couldn't
Right.
do that. He had too much pride to do that. And I actually got the chance to talk about some of this stuff with Mark Monroe, who did that great four-part Pete Rose documentary that aired on HBO last year. I even got some screen time in there, and that was all fresh on my mind when I wrote about Pete Rose when he passed away. But I found myself particularly unforgiving as well, and I'm a pushover when it comes to the PED guys by comparison, but not for Pete Rose. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's and Uncle Ted, you're saying Hall of Stats, and that's where you can have asterisk. No, what you're talking about is Hall of Stats. I there's this misconception that people can do what they want if they're good at what they do. And I think this is something that obviously goes way past baseball itself. But we excuse disrespect and being and essentially just not being good humans for a singular craft or a singular skill that isn't in its own pocket not really worth not nearly as valuable as being good to one another. And for some reason we keep beating the drum on Pete Rose and everything like that. And no, guys, it's pretty clear cut. It's pretty done. Does not belong in the Hall of Fame. You can call the Hall of Fame whatever you want it to be, but he does not deserve to be inside of it. And I'll tell you this: he's not someone who needs to be defended. Personally, if you want to put him in your shrine of it, do what you would like, but he does not belong in the Hall of Fame. It's pretty easy there. I do want to celebrate. Oh, look at this! Josh Sperry has made a lovely overlay just for us, just for you and me, Jay. We don't have this. This
Awesome.
doesn't exist except for our panel. So please, guys, leave other questions here that you want to ask Jay Jaffee here. In the year ahead, are you going to be actually tinkering with those spreadsheets a little bit more? Are you going to be doing that stuff instead of taking the time as you did over the off season?
You mean to talk about the Hall of Fame stuff?
Yeah. No. You were mentioning before that you didn't have as much time as you wanted to over the off season. And really, what should we
Oh
expect in the next year?
boy, I think it's just more of the same. I do want to think a little bit like, I have the luxury of getting to write about the Hall of Fame year round. That's one of the things that if you're writing 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes there's just not enough differentiation in what's going on to address all those small sample flukes. So maybe a little bit worth taking some deeper dives. I do want to think more about the starting pitcher stuff. I do want to think more about this championship WPA idea that Sam Miller kind of threw out there.
Mhm.
Um, I think we're talking about at Fangraphs. We're talking about doing some looking at positional adjustments. I'd like to think if we do what the ramifications of that would be. And like I said, I'd like to get us at least an experimental version of Fangraphs war-based Jaws, so we have it as a comparison, and can sort of highlight where those two differ and just think about, well, does this mean something or does this not? With the pitchers, I'm dismissive of it, and even David Appelman, I think, would tell you the same thing. FIP, which is what drives Fangraphs war, really kind of breaks down in low strikeout, low home run environments. It was
Right.
not designed to be dealt with, to be measuring stuff like, with that, especially when you're talking about a baseball that was used until it was basically liquid.
Right, which is just so bonkers. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how quickly how standardization changed.
You know,
Uh,
it
standardization of
took
the ball just changed the shape of baseball.
it took me a long time to really know what the dead ball meant. We said the dead ball era and
Uh,
everything. Like, but what does that actually mean? I was like, oh, you mean like the same baseball not replaced when a foul ball was hit, and then the ball
right.
would just be destroyed and like, not a good ball to hit. Until
Yeah.
yeah, until they're like, all right, we literally can't throw this thing anymore. Let's replace it now. I actually on that topic quickly, I never thought about this. Does that mean that there was more offensive production in the first inning than was later in the game during
That's
the
a,
dead ball era?
I think there generally is, even now,
Mhm.
because you've got the best hitters always hitting. Your
Sure.
top three hitters in your lineup always
Right,
are
right.
always guaranteed to hit. And then I think the
Yeah,
scoring is kind of a sine. The scoring by innings is a sine wave. I've
right.
never studied that. What it was like, what the historical patterns were like, though. But it's what's one thing that's funny though is, while home runs were not popular before 1920, were not common before 1920, some of those scoring levels, especially like in the 1890s, are bonkers. I mean, you
Mm,
had high scoring games because there were so many errors, and because, especially after the pitching distance changed from 50 feet, the 50-foot box to the 60-foot six, there were still, I think uh, nobody, people had not figured it all out yet about what the best approaches were and things like that. It was kind of the Wild West in terms of figuring
wait,
these things out.
wait. When did it change from 50 feet to 60?
1893.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Whew. Uh,
When did you?
okay, I'd
What
never heard that
did I
they
say?
even changed.
Did I give you a different date there? Did I
No,
when I
no,
was
no, no. I
rambling?
didn't hear when it was. I just
Okay,
I didn't register.
19th century.
I didn't
Yeah,
even know that ever happened. That there was not always 60.6.
you whippersnappers think baseball was
Yeah,
invented yesterday.
yeah. That was about 100 years before I was born.
Yeah, it was about
95
100
years
years
before
before
I
I
was
was born
born.
too. Yeah,
Oh
fair
my
enough.
God. Okay. All right. Jay. I know it was like 90 years before you were born, but you know the point I'm trying to make.
Yes,
I
I do. I do. I
but oh
do.
that's
I have to
terrifying.
take a long view of baseball history. It's just in my nature, even though I'm not a trained historian, just a lover of old baseball, passed down from my grandfather, born in 1908.
So apparently, by the way, Sid Finch, of course, you guys know Matt Kovac, did a fantastic thing this morning about his MLB history tweets, and we call him the pitcher list historian. His official title here. Uh,
Nice.
he says somebody in Saber actually did a study of that. So good. I'm on the level of
Okay.
people on giving presentations at Saber. That is wonderful. Also wrote a great
Okay.
article about Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. So definitely go read that as you linked above. But we also have Steve Rushak saying that Lou Whitaker should be in the Hall of Fame. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I have him in my book. He is, I think, among the top dozen second basemen of all time. The fact that I think, besides Ted Simmons, he's the only uh, BBWA one and done guy who's even gotten on an era committee ballot.
Hmm.
He got on the 2020 ballot, the same one that's from Simmons was elected from, if I'm not mistaken. But then he didn't get asked back when they rejiggered the era boundaries. I'm hopeful that he'll get on this upcoming ballot. Really does need to be considered. I think the fact that his double play partner Alan Trammell is in, and that Jack Morris is in, might bode well for him. But he's got to get on that ballot. And really, one of my biggest beefs with the Hall of Fame as it's constructed right now is the Historical Overview Committee, which is actually a BBWA group, not a Hall of Fame joint itself.
Mm,
Um, for a long time, they have just completely ignored, or largely ignored, these one and done guys. Some of whom, went one and done on very crowded ballots. I mean, Jim Edmonds and Johan
Yeah.
Santana, I think, are some good examples. Simmons before him, Bobby Grich has never been on a ballot. Um, I really would like it if they would at least make a point of carving out one spot per ballot. Now that we've only got 8 spots on the ballot, one for a one and done guy. I don't think it's too much to ask, just to cycle through some of these guys. There are so many pitchers that I think we should reconsider in the light of these like sub 3,000 inning workloads that were so good, but they just could not hold together their arms for long enough. The state of sports medicine had advanced, but it had not advanced enough to save some of these careers and to mitigate some of the workloads that were being piled on these guys, and they were seen
Yeah.
as, oh, they're soft. I mean, like, geez, if David Cohn came along today, I mean, he'd be winning Cy Young awards. He might be lasting longer too.
Sure. Yeah, he was actually one of my idols growing up, David Cohn. There's video
Oh,
somewhere of me pitching like him because I would push down my leg the same way and everything. It
oh,
was him and
nice.
Paul O'Neill. But no, what I was actually just thinking about was what if on the ballot you have 10 votes for this year's Hall of Fame ballot, and then you also have a replication of it that says, "Great, of the people you didn't vote for, who do you want to be on the ballot next year?" Right?
Hmm.
And it's just saying, I didn't vote for them this year because I had all my 10 votes. If you have more, then it's like, cool, you get more than that to say who should still be on next year,
Yeah,
to retain it, right? Because if you're saying that they're in a stuffed year, then that's not fair because I would vote for them next year. So hey, keep this guy around. That should
yeah.
go
That's a
toward
that's
Instagram.
that's an interesting idea. The tracker team that harvests all the public ballots and tabulates them
Oh yeah,
does have a
Ryan.
column
Yeah,
on their page where they've got the more than 10 column, and they note when a voter explicitly says, yeah, if I had one more slot, I would have voted
sure.
for Bobby Abreu or something like that. And it's
Mhm.
a very useful indicator of future support. I do write about that when I write
Hmm.
about some of these candidates, and you watch like the way a Billy Wagner rose from
Yeah,
oblivion to getting elected, and you could see, yeah, he was building a lot of wait till next year type support.
that's great. And also, how do we get you and Matt Kovac onto that committee for the Hall of Fame?
Boy, one of these days they might ask me, but it's going to be a tough call because it might mean I don't get to write. And I think
Can you just do it for us? Though we need you. We
yeah,
need you,
we'll
Jay.
see.
The
We'll
people
see.
need
We'll see
you.
we will see what the terms are if they are ever
Okay.
offered to
All right. Well, I'll get them on the phone. Just tell us where the petition is so we can all sign it. We have another question here from Big Dogs Hunt. They ask, is Andy Pettit worthy of a Hall of Fame vote?
I'm coming around on Pettit. I think when you consider the volume of what he did in the postseason, there's a lot of value there. And he had a lot of big games. Unfortunately, he had some big games where he flopped, like when the Diamondbacks picked up his pitches in the 2001 World Series and treated him like roadkill. It was not pretty. But I voted for Pettit last year. He was my kind of what I call my analytical reach. I had 9 spots, and I was like, okay, what if I reach for somebody here? Thought about Bartolo Colon, but Colon was just he was a favorite, but he was also suspended for PEDs, and I have a no go zone there. I thought about David Wright. And in the end, I went with Pettit because I wanted to further the conversation about starting pitchers. I used that same slot for Felix this year. I'll probably include both of them next year. I think if the HGH admission can be overcome, I think Andy Pettit has a chance at getting elected via committee. I think the volume of what he did, the understanding of like that he was a big game pitcher, I think would play well in front of that Veterans Committee audience or that Era Committee audience. Um, because again, we're just not going to see that kind of volume. And his top line numbers, wins, losses, ERA plus, look pretty similar to CC Sabathia's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A few more questions here before we move on to the next panel. We have who is the true baseball GOAT? That is from John Key Haverstall. Who is that for you, Jay?
Boy, I mean, I think my fallback is always Willie Mays. You can't go wrong with Willie Mays. The
Mm,
offense, the defense, the base running. I think the discussion at the time I wrote the book, I would have said the discussion of the greatest all-time player boils down to four players in the conversation. You could have Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, Barry Bonds, and Mike Trout. Now I'd amend that probably to include Shohei Ohtani. I think we probably should talk about Josh Gibson and Oscar Charleston in that as well. Great Negro Leagues players. But I think if I had to choose one and think about historical context, I mean, Babe Ruth, it's tough to beat Babe Ruth because you've got the pitching in there and you've got just the way he absolutely revolutionized baseball and American celebrity. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like it is so
absolutely.
larger than life. And Willie Mays to do what he was doing on the offensive and defensive and base running sides was just flat out amazing. I mean, Mays could have won 10 MVP awards, and it probably would have been, a fair reflection of his value. Barry Bonds, I think, superior in a lot of ways, but also, the PEDs unfortunately cloud the question, and so does his personality and some other issues, off-field issues as well. He is a reasonable choice too, but he's not as much fun.
And I mean, look, it's Mike Trout though. I'm sorry. It's
I
just
love Mike
the
Trout.
hardest
Like I
time
will,
to hit. It's the hardest time to
I
do
will
all of
keep,
this.
I will, I will keep, I'll keep Mike Trout's name in the conversation. I'm never going to dismiss Mike Trout, even though he's playing 36 games a year now. I'd rather have
The
36 games
fact
with
that it
Mike
was
Trout
just
than some of
so
these other guys.
consistent. He did it just every year.
Yeah,
And everyone else
like
is
clockwork.
doing all this stuff. Pitching the year of the pitcher 2017 doesn't matter. And Mike Trout,
Right.
it's oh
Right.
gosh, he's the best. Jay, thank you so much for coming on and even dealing with me coming in, be like, no cursing. Apologize. I'm leaning into a bit, but it's
I should have
also
known
this is
better. I'm a veteran
B-rated.
of this format. It's
PitchCon.
it's my bad. It's my bad. It's my bad. You don't have to apologize. My bad.
But I sorry to startle you all of a sudden like that.
Not at all.
But
It's
no,
okay.
really, Jay, it's great. It's awesome for you to share this with us today. I can't thank you enough for your time. And yeah, again, where can we find everything that you do, Jay?
Okay, well, I'm on Fangraphs probably 4 to 5 times a week. I am on Blue Sky. Barely. My Twitter account is still there, but it is, for all intents and purposes, it is inactive. Find me on Blue Sky. I'm still on Facebook, but I'm not really doing as much on Facebook other than promoting my work. If I don't friend you on Facebook, or if I don't respond to your friend request on Facebook, is because I'm trying to slim down there and spend less
I
time
barely
relying on
touch
it.
it.
But yes, but Blue Sky is the best place to find me. I'm happy to engage there. If you have a question for me on something I've written, or just something general, baseball question, I'll field it if I like it, and hopefully give you a good answer.
Well, that's how you pester Jay Jaffee to get a copy of his book, the Cooperstown Casebook. You can also win it as a prize here at PitchCon, so go make sure you sign up for that. Jay Jaffee, thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right, thanks for having me. Take care.